This is Ducati's Multistrada V4. In fact, it's the V4 S, and it's one of those adventure-style sport touring bikes that's all the rage at the moment. I'm a huge fan of BMW's S1000XR and KTM's Super Duke GT, but I'm a bit less of a fan now because I've just spent a few days with this. And as far as I'm concerned, it's moved the game on, and this is now the ultimate do-it-all bike.
Sport tourer be damned! In the right environment, and this road is very much the right environment, this is a proper sport bike. It's the best surface I've come across since I've been in Italy, and I've been here nearly 2 weeks and covered, well, just over 1,000 kilometers so far, I reckon. And yeah, it's the best surface I've come across. But that's not to say that it doesn't have bumps, because it does. In fact, there are even signs warning you of the bumps. So here in the province of Perugia, that means, well, they're equivalent to being their own set of mountain ranges, really. And if you were to come along here on a super bike or a hyper naked with properly firm suspension, I think they would be quite horrible, because this road would just tie them in knots. Yeah, not a lot of time to rest on a road like this. It is fantastic fun, but I couldn't tell you what the scenery looks like. I haven't got time to look at it.
So instead of the scenery, let's take a look at some of the ingredients that go into making such a feast of a motorcycle. For a little amuse-bouche to begin with, how about the front wheel?
There's a 19-inch adventure-y size sort of wheel down there at the front, but you'd never guess so unless you check the spec sheet. Just riding it, I mean, you'd never ever guess that it's not a 17-incher. It used to be that there was some kind of payoff for having a larger front wheel, but the way this bike peels into corners, the way it can just tighten its line mid-turn, and the way it flick-flacks between corners where, wow, I thought so, there is in fact a speed camera. That's a bit sneaky. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any great payoff, although I have to be honest, if I'm going to be super nitpicky, and why not, I'm in search of perfection, these Scorpion Trail 2 tyres, they're undoubtedly very good and they seem to warm up quickly, but I'd love to ride it with some properly sticky rubber on the front, just to give you that little bit more bite, little bit more feedback, because then I think, yeah, I can't imagine much else being quicker than this thing down a mountain pass like this.
Yes, the move from a 17-inch to a 19-inch front wheel is a clear indication that Ducati wants a slice of the more adventurous part of this market than it had previously, and that's fair enough. However, I'm going to concentrate on its abilities relative to BMW's XR and KTM's GT, both of them road-focused 17-inch front wheel wearing sport tourers, because, well, partly because I'm a coward. I was chased off the first gravel road we tried to film on by a farmer and his son, or his brother. It was difficult to tell, but the similar lack of teeth suggested that they were definitely related. They were also carrying rifles, and so I bravely decided to stop heading too deeply into the countryside during the hunting season here in Italy. Bear in mind that this is a very expensive bike, full of very breakable plastic, and I am a bit very rubbish off-road. And there's a more dedicated adventure bike from Ducati due to be announced in the next few weeks anyway, and here in Europe, this will be a bike used mainly on the road and will undoubtedly be seen as a viable alternative to the XR and GT. I do realise a large part of this new model is its increased adventure-ness, and I'll touch on the issue again later, but in the meantime, let's concentrate on the Multi V4's road-biased sport touring potential.
With this ridiculous 170 horsepower engine and the sublime suspension, with its quite amazing ability to soak up all these road imperfections, this could actually be Ducati's quickest bike along a road like this. Sure, something more sporty with harder suspension and, God forbid, with even more horsepower. I don't think I could handle that combination. I'd just bottle it. You need compliancy in the suspension and you need horsepower, but you don't need too much of it. It's really hit that kind of magic mark, the Multistrada. More than enough, but not quite too much.
What would definitely be a lot too much would be trying to go through the full list of features on this new Multi. We'd be here for hours, so let me try to keep it as manageable as possible. The engine is a reworked version of the V4 that started making headlines with the Panigale, then the Street Fighter, and here in the Multi it has been Gran Turismo to better suit this adventure touring role. And it's physically small, barely any larger than the V-twin it replaces. The frame is an aluminium monocoque design, very much in line with the Panigale, and what we also now see on the new Monster. The swing arm is no longer a single-sider, but has two arms for better adaptation for off-road spoke wheels, apparently. On this S version of the Multi, there's the latest adaptive suspension and, of course, an extensive suite of electronics and rider modes controlled by an easy-to-use set of controls that are of good quality, just like the TFT screen. Oh, and there's forward and rear-facing radar for adaptive cruise control and blind spot detection. That's all very impressive, no doubt, but what you really want to know is it fun to ride?
This engine, oh wow, this engine. It's got the lot. Loads of grunt off the bottom end, fantastic mid-range, and a fit top end, although, to be fair, the top end just feels like kind of an extended mid-range. And the throttle response is just so measured. I mean, I've got it in the most aggressive sport mode and still, it's never snatchy. It always gives you exactly what you're looking for. And in terms of sound, it may not be quite as big an oral assault as, say, a big twin, but it's still a delightful combination of sounds, especially if you're willing to use all the revs. It sings, and as well as singing, it's incredibly smooth. Although, like all good engines should have, it's got a bit of vibration, just enough to be character and allow you to feel what's going on. Nothing intrusive, because, oh no, hyperventilating, I'm steaming up. Whoa, hello. Whoa. I absolutely love my big twins, but this is truly exceptional, this engine. Yeah, it doesn't have quite the same smack you in the arse low-down grunt as a big twin. In fact, you could say the same of the mid-range, but it's kind of a better combination of them all with a slightly fitter top end. And the payoff is that this V4 is noticeably more civilized. It used to be that the big V-twins, they couldn't really chug along in a high gear without wanting to shake your fillings loose. And although you may say you should be playing on the gearbox anyway, and I kind of understand, it's not always like that. Sometimes you want to cruise, sometimes you're looking at the scenery and you find yourself coming into a village and you're in a tall gear and you don't really want to mess around. And then it's handy if your big engine can behave like a big engine and pull you along on the torque without actually feeling like it's going to shake itself to bits. And this V4 can do that. Ah, and here we go. A handily placed village called Fracano. Hey, let's whack her up into 6th gear. Oof. 2500 RPM, 62 k's an hour. Just a hint of a judder. Shall I give it a full throttle? Full throttle. Oh, yeah, and it starts to pull pretty quickly. And no shake, rattle and roll. Yeah, the very definition of civilized.
So far, so good. But what about the touring bit? Comfort. It's a difficult one when you want a bike to feel sporty as well, but the Multi does an excellent job of keeping you both free of aches and pains and still connected to what's going on through the seat, which on this version, by the way, is heated. Wind protection is absolutely excellent, even with this adjustable screen set on its lowest setting, but you can raise it. Even on the move with the one hand, and it's stepless, so you can set it just so. These extra deflectors, they obviously help in that respect as well. And yet, the most important extra in cold temperatures, I'd have gladly sacrificed the heated seat for some heated grips. It's got the button, look, but apparently it's not connected. It's an option that you have to pay more for on a bike that already costs north of what, 380,000 Rand? You've got to be kidding me. Really, Ducati? Really? I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Whomever decided on that little piece of penny pinching in the production team should be forced to ride to the Arctic Circle and back in December without the heated grips or gloves. Moving on from my desire to see someone suffer for my freezing hands during this test, you might just be able to tell that I have been well and truly seduced by this bike's all-encompassing abilities.
Combine all these separate elements and throw in a two-way quick shifter that apparently bathes in double cream every evening, and you have a package that is quite possibly unbeatable on a road like this. I've been privileged enough to ride plenty of incredible superbikes in my time, but I'd be disappointed if you took this Multi off me now and gave me the best of those. I mean, even if I was a smidgen quicker, who cares? Because there's no stopwatch up here in the hills. What matters is the amount of fun that you're having, and right here, right now, I'm having the maximum amount of fun on this bike, on this road.
I can't even pretend to be dispassionate and objective anymore. I bloody well love the breadth of this bike's abilities. It's not faultless, and I'll mention a few of my admittedly personal and minor niggles later, but as a sport tourer, as a daily rider, a commuter and a scratcher, a bike for long distances and short crazy blasts in the mountains, it sits proudly on top of a class of bikes that already contains some excellent competitors. They may be great, but Ducati's Multistrada V4, well, it's truly exceptional. Okay, thanks to our Ignition TV viewers in South Africa, if you've joined the test here on YouTube for some extra chat about the Multi. And if you were already watching on YouTube, then you'll see I'm now in the not very glamorous confines of my van, now in Tuscany in a small car park with just the two camper van spots in the very small town of Monteone. I think that's how they say it, just up the road from where tomorrow I will join the world launch of the Multistrada V2. Like I said there at the end of the test, I'm pretty much blown away by this bike's capabilities, and that, remember, without even having ridden it off-road, which adds another huge potential playground for riders to experience. Since I finished that test and rode it another 300 k's or so back to Bologna, I've actually spent some time with Ducati's new Monster and the V4 Street Fighter 2021 version, and that in particular is a bike I was also riding for the first time and is right up my street. Naked sport bikes are my personal favourite. But given the nature of the roads here in Italy, at least in the part of the Apennines that I've been roaming, and to be fair, this applies to the majority of European mountainous roads, whether it be in Italy or Austria or Switzerland or France, or even in the Auvergne part of France where I live when I'm not travelling in a van. They're all a bit too tight and twisty for something like the Street Fighter with over 200 horsepower on tap. South Africa's and Mpumalanga's mountain roads are a lot more open and fast, so they actually do suit the Street Fighter. To be honest though, the Italian roads are undoubtedly in the greatest state of disrepair compared to those other countries, and noticeably so, meaning that although I love the insanity that is the Street Fighter and all that it offers, I really did not enjoy the bike in the same way that I could do with this Multistrada. The multi-suspension in particular allows you to deal with much more dodgy road surfaces than a more dedicated road bike and keep your speeds up without doing the same to your stress levels. I really do think that the suspension on the Multi is the best I've ever used for the road. It just glides over anything from a small bump to a series of huge dips and cracks and potholes, and it never seems to get flustered. It saves you from feeling anything too jarring, and yet at the same time it never gets so floaty or remote that you feel isolated from any feedback, and that meant I still felt like I was connected to the road. And of course you can adjust the sportiness of the overall package, as you can on many bikes these days, by cycling through the various riding modes. As I mentioned, I'd like to try the bike with some properly sticky rubber, and so by extension I'd like to try it with the 17-inch wheels, but at the same time I wouldn't like to sacrifice any of that extended suspension travel that comes with being an adventure bike. Yeah, I know, typical journalist, always wanting something more. Maybe though I'll get that with the Pikes Peak edition of the Multi that I believe will have the 17-inch rims, though I don't know what will happen in terms of suspension travel. An announcement is about to drop any second now for this new model, but I can't wait any longer to upload this extra discussion piece, so I'll have to tackle that in an upcoming news report. Really though, if I wanted the bike just for road riding, I wouldn't hesitate to still go for this model with the 19-incher at the front, because it doesn't impede your ability to throw the bike around, and as long as you've got a good temperature into that front Pirelli Scorpion trail, then you can still barrel into a turn at a fair old rate of knots with plenty of confidence. Much like I was so hugely impressed with KTM Super Adventure S when I rode it earlier this year, and its ability to behave like a comfortable sport bike on the road, the same goes for the Multi. Both may be adventure bikes with genuine off-road potential, but by the same token, both are also spectacularly capable sporting tools down a tarred back road. Having talked with some fellow journalists who have sampled the bike off-road, they say it's on a par with the competition, and I've got no reason to doubt them. All I would say is that really I wouldn't want to attack anything much more demanding than some grade A gravel roads or hard-packed trails, but then my skills are pretty much quite limited in that respect. Even if you are a great off-road rider, then you'll be well aware that you are inevitably at some point going to fall, and then I'd say you'd better have invested in all the optional protection, because there's plenty of plastic on this bike and it's going to break and look very second-hand very quickly. Getting it to look spanky and new again will surely be an incredibly expensive business. Okay, I am waffling on here a bit, but bear with me. Let me gather my thoughts a bit and just mention some other stuff that I really like before getting to the stuff I was less impressed with, and there is some of that too. Long distance comfort, as I said, was excellent. Seat great, take note KTM, and the wind protection really is fantastic. Looking at my notes, which I need to do again, hold on a second. Yeah, looking at my notes, we have the engine, which I feel I raved enough about, but I never mentioned the airbox roar, which is great at higher RPM, thankfully, because even with the Akrapovic exhaust, it sounded a bit muted to me. Talking of which, given the firing order, it sort of sounds more like an offbeat V-twin than a traditional V4, which is also cool, at least to me. And here's another V-twin reference. The bike feels very thin, the sort of thing you usually get with a twin, and that's because, as I said in the piece, although there's a couple of extra cylinders here, the engine really is only very slightly physically larger than the V-twin it replaces. It's amazing, really, and that thinness helps you get your feet on the ground, sort of effectively reducing the seat height. One more engine positive before I move on, and that's the service intervals, which is sort of 15,000 kilometers for, you know, regular checkups and 60,000 kilometers for a major valve clearance one. That's pretty impressive. Obviously, there'll be many comments down below about the cost being so high for a full V4 Ducati service that overall there's no saving, but I have no experience of that, so I'll let the commenters lead me on that one. I do think, though, that it speaks well as to reliability, but time will obviously be needed for us to evaluate that any further. Right, what else? Hang on a second. Electronics. The radar cruise control that I've already tried on the KTM Super Adventure S and enjoyed. The same sort of deal here, though I found it a little easier to implement on the Ducati, but that may be down to a greater familiarity with the idea of the radar cruise control now. But it is the first time I've experienced the blind spot detection with the rear-facing radar, and being the cynical git I am, I thought that would be redundant for me, given that I am an experienced motorcyclist and I'm usually travelling faster than the surrounding traffic. It's how I ride. I figure being on the attack, so to speak, is the safest way to travel. You know, being a bit quicker than the traffic around you puts you in greater control. Sounds wrong, but I feel it's right anyway. However, I didn't account for the fact that I've been wearing earphones to get an audible warning of speed cameras from my Radar Bot app, because there's a scary number of those things in Italy. So I've been a bit more careful, timid even with my speeds, and that has meant traffic catching and passing me at times. And then I didn't account for the Italian drivers, who I will tell you are the most aggressive in Europe. Crazy, even. Solid white lines mean nothing. Blind corners are a challenge, not a warning. Following distance is a game of chicken. Indicators are only to be used if a policeman is actually watching you, and even then it's not compulsory, since I have seen plenty of police cars do the mirror signal maneuver thing without the signal bit. Sometimes it seems without the mirror bit as well. Anyway, the blind spot system is adjustable for sensitivity in terms of how close the traffic has to be before it warns you, and it warns you by flashing an orange light on the relevant mirror, much like many cars already do these days. I'm grateful it was there. I think it's a valuable addition, though it did turn into a kind of psychedelic disco on my way into Bologna during rush hour, so much so that it was firing off on both sides, and I eventually decided to rather risk the speeding fines and just be more aggressive with the traffic myself. That may be something I'll come to regret. We'll have to see if I get any demands for money from Ducati over the next couple of weeks. Okay, let me try and rattle off a few things I didn't like so much, and if you're still watching, thank you. I appreciate your commitment. Okay, where are we? Let's hold on a second, give myself a reminder. Let's stay with the engine for a moment. And I think this is the first time I'm going to moan about this particular aspect of a bike, but the engine braking, it's a bit too severe for my liking. I'm not one to wind off the engine braking fully where that is an option. I do like the bike to slow rather than freewheel when I ease off the throttle, but on the Multi as is, yeah, it's just a bit too severe. Going into a hairpin, it's bearable because you're coming to an almost standstill kind of speed, and by the same token, if you roll off at 200 k's an hour plus, it's also not so noticeable. But on a road like the one I was enjoying during the test, where it's slowish to medium-ish speed corners, too much speed is scrubbed off, and you find yourself at times almost adding a squirt of throttle when you should be just doing the rolling on and off. What else? the quick shifter. I don't like it that you can only change up when you've got some throttle in play. I know, it sounds logical to work only like that, but there are times when you're on a closed throttle and you decide to just snick up 1 or 2 gears. Behind a car you were preparing to overtake, for instance, and maybe you come into a village, a lower speed limit arrives and you think, sod it, I'll stay here for a while, so I'm just going to bump up from 2nd to 4th gear, for example, and you're on a closed throttle. No way, it just won't let you do it. The same used to be true in the opposite direction for auto blip down changes. You had to have the throttle fully closed or it wouldn't let you change gear. That's not so anymore, and even not on this multi. You can have the throttle partially open and you can bang it down a gear and it'll blip and, you know, slot in the lower gear. And I just want the same option on the way up the gearbox. What else? Yes, the remote key thingamy, which I enjoy. I know many don't, but I like knowing as long as the key's in my jacket, I can simply jump on and get going. The multi does this very well, but it won't let me, as far as I know, do the same with a fuel filler cap. I have to dig around in my jacket, find the key, and then open it the old-fashioned way. I know Don almost got stranded with a BMW GS that wouldn't open his remote fuel filler cap, but surely having a remote option and the use of a key as a backup isn't too much to ask of a bike that's got 360-degree radar. You know what I mean? Panniers, they feel a bit flimsy, and the right one that has to morph itself around the exhaust is really small, but then that isn't something unique to this bike, but it's still annoying. And some of the black plastic bits, they look a bit cheap and feel even cheaper. Even the plastic shroud over the remote ignition start, which is obviously for protection against moisture and dust, well, it's a bit cheap and nasty compared to the beautifully manufactured items from the German opposition. It's a small thing, but since you have to interact with it every time you ride the bike, it would be nice if it was more pleasingly tactile, more of a little engineering delight than poking some vague button under what looks like a bit of offcut from a farmer's Wellington boot. And then there are some exposed wires still, which shouldn't be on an expensive bike like this, and I may have mentioned it in the test, but I've since ridden the extraordinarily brilliant and even more extraordinarily expensive Street Fighter V4 S, and the same lovely but unconnected heated grips button is there as well. On any bike in this price range, it should be connected. No ifs, buts or maybes. Hook it up. Make it work. Asking extra money for something so basic that it's almost a UN-defined human right, like access to water, is a crime against humanity. It's a crime against your customers' wallets as well, and it's an egregious cheapening of your own character. Get it sorted. It's demeaning to even have to talk about it. You've made me feel dirty and cheap, Ducati, and all I really want to do is praise you to the ends of the earth for making such a stupendously brilliant motorcycle. I want one very badly indeed, but I can't afford one, and that itself is a crime against my humanity. Right. I think I should probably go for a lie down now. Feel free to disagree or, heaven forbid, agree with me in the comments below. And if you're still here, then well done, and give the video a thumbs up, please, and subscribe for more rambling bike tests. And I'll see you all on the next one.